have you with us tonight. Thanks for joining us. So this time in the Liminality Lounge is a space hosted by Forge Melbourne, and it's a time where we get to listen, share, talk about our liminal experiences, and also, you know, there's times there to lament and grieve as well. And so tonight on the lounge we have three guests. We have Esther Polis, all the way from Queensland, and we have Kathryn, Jensen, and Rob Tanner from Melbourne. So it's great to have them on the lounge with us, and I'll get them to introduce themselves shortly. But just as for the rest of you here with us tonight as participants, again, a big welcome to you all. And what I tend to encourage you to do is pop any questions or comments you might have in the chat. And I'll weave some of those questions and comments into the conversation with our guests and give them the opportunity to respond. I also, maybe a little bit later on in our time together, give you the opportunity, if you want to unmute yourselves, if you have any questions you might want to ask, or any comments you want to make around this whole idea of liminality. And some of the things we've been talking about in our as we've been doing this from week to week is that this whole situation with COVID-19 is a definite liminal experience that we're all going through globally. We're definitely going through in a different kind of way here in Melbourne, as opposed even to the rest of our state of Victoria, and even compared to our other fellow Australians across the country. And so, enjoy the time together. We'll tend to go for about an hour. We'll be finishing pretty much at 8:30 on the dot. So I encourage you to, again, use the chat room, the chat comment area as much as possible, because we really do want you to participate with our conversation. And I might just start off just by getting maybe Esther, if you could just introduce yourself briefly. That'd be great. Just a bit about your context and your background.
Okay, I'll start with background. I'm originally from New South Wales. My parents were missionaries with the United Aborigines Mission until I was 16. Dad had a major stroke, so it meant a town shift, and that went from there to Sydney, did my training as a preschool teacher, and I suppose 8 years ago I got my Bachelor of Education up here, so I'm qualified to teach 2 to 12s. Promptly gave it up as soon as I got my my Bachelor. I married Eric after college, after working as a director in a preschool for a while, and then he went into Baptist Theological College, Morling College in New South Wales. So we had 5 years in a pastorate there, including college. Went to Papua New Guinea with the Australian Baptist Missionary Society, had 9 years in Papua New Guinea, came home, and then the Lord called us to go outback Queensland to a little opal mining community, to be salt and light in the community out there, with no church or anything like that, being part of the community. And then the end of that was a school. We applied for, got a school for there, and then Eric transferred out to where we are now. And we've been in Warwick since 2012. We are now retired. We are part of the Baptist Church here. I tend to be a catalyst with the leaders, bringing in things of 5Q, and Eric's a shepherd as well as a teacher, and we often spend half our year here and then the other half out in the opal mining community again. So that's it.
That's great. Thanks, Esther. And just say you might all know, it's an interesting point. I grew up in a town very close to where Esther lives in Warwick, a town called Stanthorpe. So when I first met Esther, I was quite excited to think she was sort of up near that country where I came from. Although you've obviously been in different parts of the country, that's where you're currently located, Esther. So great to have you with us tonight. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll get into some more conversation shortly. So I might call Kathryn Jensen, if you could just introduce yourself a little. Thank you.
Thanks, Oresti. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathryn. You can tell I live in Melbourne because I'm very excited that I had a haircut today, and it's been the highlight of the month.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a bit of my context. I live in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. I live in South Morang, and I've been out in this neck of the woods for the last bit over a decade now, but grew up in the eastern suburbs. And yeah, when I moved over to the northern suburbs, it felt like a whole other world out here. I kind of joke that if you're familiar with The Lord of the Rings, it felt like moving to Mordor, because one does not simply walk into the north. And yeah, I love it out here. I've been in pastoral ministry for the last decade or so, and in a very multi-ethnic, medium-sized Baptist church here in Mill Park. And yeah, I love our multi-ethnic community, and I'm very passionate about God moving into the neighbourhood and joining in with what God's doing, seeing community flourish. About 7 years ago now. So my background is also counselling. So we started a counselling service in partnership with our local church. So I direct and counsel in that as well. Yeah, and have a heart for a little bit further north, just exploring at this time to see what God's up to in some of the new housing estates that are just being built currently in the north. So yeah, that's a little bit of me.
That's great. Thanks, Kathryn. I can appreciate your comments about relief from getting your hair done or getting a haircut. I mean, I don't get my hair done. I just get a haircut. But you can definitely say a lot of those hairdressers and barbers had massive queues out the front.
Yes. Oh, yeah. There was. I stood in a queue for about 20 minutes.
Yeah. I had to wait about over an hour for mine.
Yes.
But anyway, no, good stuff. And yeah, appreciate your comments about the north. I know I've got my friends from the east, and it feels like a bit of a different experience out here in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. But I love that you're part of our neighbourhood, part of our community, and that you're really committed to it. I'm really excited about that, Kathryn. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Rob, you're up next. Rob Tanner, just a bit about yourself, mate.
Thanks, Aristi. I'd love to get a haircut, but I don't have to worry about it.
I love it, mate. You got the perpetual haircut.
Sue just, gets the clipper and goes over it every couple of weeks.
Right.
Yeah, so my name's Rob, and I've been in Melbourne for the last 5 years with my wife, Sue. Kind of before that, we were in New South Wales, where I spent most of my ministry. I also trained at Morley, Theological College, Baptist College in Eastwood in Sydney. And that was from 1990 to 1993. And during that time at college, we got led into this new thing about church planting, which was happening around the place. And so I've been in pastoral ministry in New South Wales from 1991 up until 2011. 3 of those churches were church plants in Sydney, around the western suburbs, around the Hills district as well. And then we spent some wonderful time down on the south coast at a church down there, which is really good. We lived right on the ocean. We literally lived on a cliff looking down on the ocean. And God gave my wife Sue a word one day, which was, you can't stay for the view. And so we started exploring, because we felt like he was moving us and stirring us up to look at something else. And so we ended up feeling that was coming to Melbourne. Interestingly enough, my wife had never been to Melbourne, and I'd only been for a weekend. So we knew next to nothing. We probably still know next to nothing, except I agree with Kathryn. The northern suburbs are very much like Mordor. It's a hard job. But yeah, so we moved to Melbourne. Like I said, my wife works for Global Interaction. She's finishing off a master's in art therapy, which she's hoping to get into next year. And yeah, I just was exploring what God had for us out here. It was a very difficult year, the first year I was here, because nothing was opening up, and I was just getting knocked back left, right, and center in myself. I was just losing confidence. I was trying to figure out what God was saying, and all those type of things. But eventually he's led us to a church. So in the last 4 years, we've been in a church. My current role with that church is up here in the north in Craigieburn, a church called North Church. And my role with North Church is right now as the acting senior pastor. So we committed to a year to do that, and we've just agreed with the leadership to do another 6 months to take us up to June next year. So we're still really in the process of discerning what God is saying and doing. Do we stay? Do we go? Do we start something else? Where do we, all those type of things. So that's kind of the background. I do enjoy Melbourne. I do. The weather today really, really was horrible. It's spring, and I looked at my phone this morning. It said it felt like it was minus 4.9 up here in Wallen. So it's just cool. But yeah, so we are in that process. We still feel like we're a little bit in the wilderness, and we still feel like we're not really sure what God's saying directly with some certain things. And that's, I guess, part of that liminality thing for us, is to just sort of go, well, what are we learning in the midst of it? And trying to listen and trying to, understand and, walk closer with Jesus in that process as well. So
that's great. Thanks, Rob. Look, I might just open it up with and this is a question I would typically ask, just around your understanding of liminality. Might just start with you there, Esther. Just a brief, I guess, your brief snapshot from you around how you understand liminality. What kind of words would you use to describe it?
I suppose for me, I didn't have the word as a word until till I started to do a fivefold with Alan Hirsch, and it came up then in his book. But I see it in, I think, three ways. I see it in things that situational things, like when I was young, I lived in the part-time in the Aboriginal community and part-time in what was supposed was my other normal, my white normal. So I see it like that, and so things coming back from PNG fit into that sort of thing. I see it as also to do with the dark night of the soul, of which I've had 2 or 3, and it becomes that thing where you're dealing with an emotions and the struggle of whatever it is that you're going through. One I saw as a pruning, but I actually have got to a place with that sort of one where now it is, that space is something that I choose to be in a safe, warm space. So like the last time, it became, instead of just being in a dark place, I became under the wing of the Lord, like a mother hen gathers her chicks in under her wings. And that has to be a safe, secure place, so that irrespective of how, in a sense, insecure one may be, one is safe and secure. And so, in a sense, I'm aiming to look forward to and that sort of thing. And I suppose then other things with liminality then for me are situational. I know there's another one. I'll let it go at that at the moment. But for me, it's been rather diverse all through my life, because it depends on what is happening at the time, whether it's something in a sense that I have no control of, or whether it's something. Well, actually, I think most of the time I'm learning that I don't have control. So, but yes, so it's, for me, liminality is almost something I live in, because we tend to be very flexible in how life is lived at this time, particularly now that we're in our retirement. So for me, it's a very broad thing, not just a specific only place.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. And what you've touched on there is maybe you didn't have the language or maybe the term liminality. That's come up before with other guests, but what's resonated with what you've said is that they feel like they've been living it or have experienced it in younger years, even in childhood, in teen years, but now we've got a name for it. And so, and also it'd be interesting maybe a little bit later to explore that notion of what you shared about being in that safe space, and almost your whole posture seems to have changed towards the circumstances of liminality. So we've got to hold that thought, and hopefully we can come back to it maybe as a bit of a conversation point. We'll come back to that. I think I'm really looking forward to delving into that more deeply. Kathryn, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think Esther's spot on in that it's hard to find language for it, but when you're in it, you know, there's something about it. I would describe liminal space as the in-between space. It's that transitional place where you're neither here nor there. A few analogies that come to mind, like when you're about to step onto a train and you've got that mind the gap, you know, on the platform. It's that's the space. Or something that was spoken over me many years ago during a time of transition, which I now know was a liminal space. They said to me, oh, it's like you've got one foot on either side of a fault line. And it's actually a vulnerable space to be in, because when the faults move, you can fall in the gap. Like when the train moves, that's why you have to mind the gap. So it's this sort of dangerous space. I also think of, you know, biblical examples of the Israelites wandering in the desert, or Holy Saturday, you know, that day between Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday, where what on earth is going on and we're waiting. So that's my take on liminality.
No, that's great. No, some great perspectives there, and really, that Saturday between the Friday and Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, can be quite a depressing experience for people living through that, and a range of emotions. Very good.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Rob.
Yeah, those are really good. I guess for me, it starts with the idea of discomfort. So in my experience over the years, be it personal or professional, there's a stirring up that something isn't just quite right. Not that it's bad, but that something's just not right. And I'm not feeling connected to it, or I think the words used to be used a long time ago was a few people was this holy discontent. And so that's kind of on this one side of it for me, that there's this stirring up by God to want to do stuff. Now, often in my early days with church planting, it was, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we have success. We get this amount of people, we see this amount of people saved, we get this amount of people in groups, and the churches grew really strongly. But for me, I found early on in the piece, because I was 25 when I became a senior pastor, so it's very young, but I came to the awareness that it actually wasn't about what I was doing, it was about who I was. And so for me, my experience with liminality has been to push me into that, into the threshold, into that that sort of middle ground in those areas. And that's like being in a washing machine with rocks. It's just things are happening and things are being knocked around. And it's, often, to be honest, for me, it was very unpleasant because they were dealing with my character, and it wasn't so much about me as a pastor. It was just about me as a follower of Jesus in those areas. So I found that middle ground is actually quite intense, but it's definitely worthwhile if you can actually persevere. And I think my experience of sort of going through into that area was that hopefully I became a little bit more self-aware. And so when I moved out the other side, I understood, well, this is why I'm getting annoyed with you, or this is why I'm not spending time with God. It's those type of things. So for me, I guess it's very personal. And for me, that means growth, but it means struggle at the same time as well. It doesn't just get plopped down on your lap, unfortunately, because I would have rather had it all back in 1991 laid on my lap, and I would have been perfect from there on. And now I'm not. And I'm still in those areas as well. And that's ministry-wise with liminality. There are often personal things, and I've gone through personal things that were very much quite a struggle and hardship in my life. And the only way to kind of confront and grow through them was to actually be willing to just open it up and just sort of, okay, let's talk about this. Let's look at this. Let's figure this out in those areas. So hopefully, like I said, it does come to a point where there is joy. And I know that's very individual, not necessarily corporate. But that's just kind of where I'm at thinking of it. So,
No, look, it is very personal. That's great, Rob. Just give me your thoughts. Maybe the three of you, anyone can go in first. Just the connection between that, the whole experience. I mean, and Rob, you mentioned joy. Do you find, I mean, that's Rob. He's just said that, and that's fine. How about the rest of you? How do you feel about that? Do you feel that's something you've experienced, or is that a possible thing for the people of God when they go through liminality? Not trying to take away from you what you've said, Rob, but I'm just trying to throw that one around. Does that resonate with us? Is there a sense of purpose? I mean, God shapes us in this space for sure, but can we use a word like joy in the midst of all that?
For me, it has to be the outcome you're looking for. If you are not moving towards becoming who God meant you to be and to come into joy, then for me the journey would be much harder.
Yeah. So if your sense there, Esther, is that this is in God, then are you saying that that's a joyful thing, or can be, or that's your matter of your perspective?
I'd say, looking back, if I go back, it was never a joy. It was something that came after I'd moved out, and you suddenly realised that you actually had solid ground under you, or a sense of where you were meant to be or what you were meant to be doing. But over time and working through the different things, it now is something I attempt to step into that grace very quickly. So with my last personal issue, back at the beginning of this year, it was an issue of, as soon as I realised that I was in a dark place, and it was a lack of and a loss of identity. As soon as I realised I was in there, it was like, I don't have to have this as a thing that is what's the word? I'll lose words. I decided I could make a choice.
Yeah.
And the choice for me was to step into the grace of God that allowed me to be safe and secure, even though I hadn't at that particular moment found the joy. And the fact that I was in presence and knew where I was in Christ, then joy could happen. And that began then the process of coming out. So for me, that's really important to learn to walk towards.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that links back to what you said earlier about being in that safe place. Is that correct? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah.
No, that's correct.
Yeah, no, definite decision. That's interesting. Kathryn.
It depends on your definition of joy, but
Give us one. Give us a Kathryn Jensen special.
The KJV, the Kathryn Jensen version.
Oh, absolutely, yes. The authorized version, that's right.
Yeah, no, look, joy, sort of kind of like a contentment in the promises of God, something like that. Because to me, like the best, like I can see glimpses of joy in my own liminal space, in between space, and there's sort of these pockets of time where either a prophetic voice has spoken in and really called me back to the promises that I've been waiting on God for. Yeah, I think it is like Esther talked about the dark night of the soul, and I think that is often what it does feel like in the liminal space. It's this dark place, but within that there are moments of light shining in and there's joy in those moments where the promises are confirmed and you just keep going. Yeah.
No, that's good. That's great. I want to move this away now from the personal, because I think it always begins, especially around this topic of liminality, around personally how we view it, we understand it, how we relate to God in the midst of that, dark night of the soul, and so forth. Even hearing, Esther's posture now, as she really leans in and has made that decision at the outset. This may not feel great, may not be feeling content or joyful, but in that sense, trusting God that it will emerge somehow. God is in there in the midst of it all. You've all had pastoral experience, definitely. And so when you relate to others in the life of the church, where does this liminality piece fit in, do you find, in your experience? you feel it's something you can bring up in the conversation with people? Maybe not even using the word liminality, but just what have been maybe some of your experiences, maybe a particular story you might have to share. And I guess my thinking here is this something in the suite of ministry that we really need to be aware of and be able to articulate, to be able to bless others, because that's ministry should do that. We should be assisting others, strengthening them, blessing them through what we do. Yeah, give me your thoughts on that, maybe a story to help illuminate that. Anyone can chime in.
I'll just share a quick story, Rusty. I mean, obviously right now, the church across Australia, churches across the world, but particularly across Australia, is asking questions of what is church. And we're hearing a lot of things like, I want to go back to Egypt. I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to do that, those type of things. It's understandable. But there's a lot of people who are really struggling with it as well. And I think that, I'm not so sure we should be saying the past was the right way. I think we need to be saying, what's God doing now? And how does that look in the future? Now, I was talking with a young guy who I know, who's part of my church. He's 19 years old. And I was talking with him a little while ago. I just rang him up just to see how he was doing. And, within 2 minutes, I could tell he was he was depressed. I mean, you could just hear it on the phone. And he's not that type of guy, but you could just hear what was going on. And so we began to talk about it. And, he began to share with me, he's just, he's social. He wants to be around people. He wasn't around people. He wasn't able to get to youth group. He wasn't able to connect with his friends. He's got a disability, which makes it a little bit hard for him in terms of work, but he just could not find work anywhere. And so he was stuck at home, and he was over all the technology stuff anyway. I was like, you know what? It's not the same in those areas. And I had to listen to what he was saying and not try and fix the problem, but to actually go, what's going on. But I was quite worried about him because we did get on to talking about depression, and I got him to do some follow-up stuff in those areas and those sides as well. But it was just interesting that, I think he's a representation of a lot of people in our church. I don't care what your age is or your experience in the church, but there's a lot of people out there feeling isolated, separated. They're not having a lot of hope in Victoria. At this stage, we're kind of getting angry and those things as well. And I just, like I said, as I was talking to this young guy, it kind of hit me. When we get out of this, we're still going to have a lot of people who are struggling with grief, who are struggling with maybe PTSD, depression, all those different types of things as well. And so it made me think, and for him, we couldn't just go to the past and say, let's meet like we have, and that's going to fix the situation here. We need to be at this situation now, but looking into the future to say, well, what's actually going to, we can grow through this. We can be stronger through this. And like you were saying with joy, we might not be happy now, but it's possible to actually have joy in the circumstance and situation and stuff. But it concerns me a lot because I knew that he was just the tip of the iceberg. And there are so many people out there who are struggling. I know in our church, 50% of our people haven't connected up by technology because they don't want to use technology. It's just not their thing. That leaves them even more isolated out there as well. And so I just think that, we're going to have some issues for us, and it's representative in stories, people's lives. So,
Thanks, Rob. Space is open for you to share. Anyone else can respond. So.
Maybe I'll share two-part. I think as I reflect on people's responses to the liminality of COVID and lockdown, all of that sort of stuff, like it prompts in us, I reckon, two different kinds of responses. Either you try and pull the future into the present by, pushing back against government or pushing back against our current reality. And there's all sorts of ways, I reckon, in which we do that. And part of how we can learn to live in liminal space is reclaiming lament and actually encouraging those sorts of conversations. It's actually, there's so much space for lament in the Psalms, and God gives us language and ways in which to do that. So a lot of those sorts of pastoral conversations I'm having at the moment is around, well, It's actually okay to grieve what we've lost. And coming back to the two different responses, we either try and pull the future into the present, or we learn to trust and wait upon God and develop something of a kingdom imagination of, God, what are you wanting to do here? What are you preparing me, us, the people of God for? So maybe that's a good time. I found a journal entry I wrote a couple of months ago on liminality, actually. And if it's okay, Aresti, I'd love to just share it with you guys.
Go for it. Yes, please do.
Okay, so I called it Deserts and Captivity. The people of God are well acquainted with deserts and captivity. Deserts are wandering liminal spaces, exposing places. It's in the desert that choices are made. Will I long for what was, even though it looked like bondage? Or will I learn to live the abiding life, trusting God for the present moment and hoping in the promised future? Deserts are always about trust. They are places of temptation and invitation. Temptation to gather more than what's needed. Invitation to trust for daily bread. Temptation to strive in self-reliance. Invitation to live by every word that comes from the mouth of God. We don't wander into deserts by choice. We go because the Spirit leads us, just as he led the Israelites and Jesus. And the desert is what makes us. It's our baptism of fire. Israel passed through the waters of the Red Sea. Jesus passed through the waters of baptism. The desert awaited both. The desert forms character. It's the line in the sand, literally. The choices we make there determine whether we'll die wandering in self-reliance, or whether we're ready to trust God in complete dependence when the provisions are plenty and the promises fulfilled. And then this is my personal statement at the end. I'm affirming before you, God, that I'm determined to wait on you for living water rather than to strike the rock myself. I'll trust and wait on you.
That's great.
I think that sort of is the struggle for most of us in the liminal space. Are we going to try and do it ourselves, or are we going to trust and abide?
No, that's great. When did you write that piece again? Was it?
That was on the 12th of August. I wrote that.
Yeah. No,
Can't remember exactly what level of lockdown we were in at that time, but
yeah.
Yeah.
No, great words, Kathryn. Great words. Yeah. I'm just encouraging our participants, listeners, if you want to jot in a question or a comment in the comments, feel free to do that, and sort of incorporate them in the conversation. A little bit later on, we'll open up for you to unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question or make a comment. Yeah. Esther, do you have anything you were going to share?
Yeah, I suppose I'm not so much focused on I have a story from COVID, but I think back to when we'd been to Papua New Guinea, come home and moved. The Lord sent us to go out to Yarra, the little opal mining community in 1,000 kilometres west of Brisbane, from interstate as well. In learning that in being there, I actually learned the difference between being in the body of Christ in a building, in a town, in a city. We were in Sydney, and then having no church building, no church as such. The differences between that and that, like, I discovered in myself that I actually needed a doorpost. Well, after the service, Eric and I would go out, you'd stand at the front door and you'd speak to people I could remember from last week, and I could have the interaction, and I didn't have a doorpost. And the struggle to not have a doorpost, because I'm an introvert, Eric's the extrovert. And I even had to learn how to be able to say hello to folk, and say my name is, and that. And into this place where literally we were living, in the sense, in the desert. And to find the grace of God in a place of like that, and learn that grace is space. It is the space to learn and grow in the things that you haven't grown in as yet. It is the space to come into a deeper trust of God in what ministry can look like. Because all of a sudden we weren't in your comfortable church, we were in the community. We had to learn to be part of the community, to be able to actually have a ministry with the people, and to learn to trust. We didn't even have financial support or anything when we went there. So we were, in a sense, put into a church planting situation, even though we didn't actually start a church, but we did a whole lot of things that provided that at times and things like that. But that, for me, is, I suppose, an example of what you were asking at the beginning with that, that there's so much. Liminal spaces can be really interesting, exciting, challenging, but they can really be a growth period as well. So, yeah.
No, that's great. That's great, Esther. So just on that, just from what you've described there as well, what maybe some thoughts around, because, you know, we talk about ministry, but then there's the in ministering to others, there's that call to mission as well, to extend the kingdom, to reach those areas that haven't been reached. And it's engaging with people that are not Christians, having conversations with them. And how do you feel this whole area of liminality would relate to people, just general people in the community? Not just something as Christians would discuss, but just the people that we meet in the neighbourhood.
I think people are going through these situations all the time. And so it's learning to identify with where they're at and being able to come alongside them and find out and be able to speak into it, not because you actually have a title as pastor or the pastor's wife or anything like that, but it's learning to be the people. And then from there, even finding what are the needs within the community that can show how God provides. For instance, where we went, there was no school. There was all the children were on distance ed, and one of the mums came to me when I gave up teaching their children because I got high blood pressure from all the work and everything that I was doing to do that. It became this whole thing of, we need a school. Yeah, right. That distance out, you can just look at that as, we can't do that. But the reality was we actually did. We applied for a school, and against all odds, we literally had a brand new school west of the divide in 2 years on the ground operating. And for me, and it became something that the people saw a miracle and their needs were met. And it opened doors then to change from, we had been working with Sunday school, and then when the kids went to school, they didn't need Sunday school as such before, as it was before, but we then had options into the school because Eric was also trained as a teacher, and he was able to bring in then scripture and that. And so you had opportunity for all of the children to be able for things to share with. You had opportunity with the staff. You had opportunities in the town to be able to relate to people because you were part of them rather than something different from them.
That's good. Okay, I'm going to come off that a little bit. I know earlier when we started this conversation, or when you introducing yourself, Esther, you mentioned 5Q, and I know we've obviously got a lot of interaction around 5Q coaching, the whole piece there around APEST, Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. And I know Rob and Kathryn, you're across that as well. We've done some stuff together in that space. So again, I'm linking this back to at Forge Melbourne. We'll talk a lot about not just ministry, but also mission, but we'll talk about APEST culture. And the other aspect is also liminality, that when we're on this journey together as the people of God on mission, and as we're on mission, we minister to people and we want to reach those that haven't been reached. But, you know, if you're a shepherd, if you're a prophet, if you're an apostle, teacher, evangelist, there's going to be a range of different perspectives. And I'm just mindful that sometimes we can get the overly positive evangelist type that wouldn't dare want to mention liminality. You know, sometimes we can have those unhealthy forms of each of the gifts. And we're on a growing journey as we mature in those gifts. Maybe just let's have some conversation around that. How does liminality fit into that? How does because I know some evangelists would struggle to mention anything that sounds negative. But shepherds would say, but hang on, real life means there's going to be liminal spaces. We all go through it. So does the most positive evangelist. Is that bad news? I mean, you know, let's have some conversation around that, just to try to make sense of this. How do we work together as the people of God, representing God, and being a blessing and being good news to our, you know, bringing good news to our neighbourhoods and our communities.
At the risk of being a positive evangelist, or Esty,
yes.
The good news is that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us in the liminal space. So he gets it better than any of us.
Yeah.
That's like, I think that's the positive reframe. But like, as I was saying before, he also creates room for lament, and that we can grieve in the liminal space and go, oh, how, you know, hard this is, and lean into that. And I think maybe the positive evangelist in me as well, you know, like I am a glass half full sort of person. And I go, there's so many times during this pandemic that I've just, you know, come up with my own hashtag it took a pandemic. And because of all the opportunities that this time has created for us to rethink what is church and what does it mean to be the people of God, and the whole 5Q thing, like, it's really decentralized the power. It's you know, quite literally moved us outside the four walls. So many opportunities. You know, it's leveled the playing field, I think, in terms of you know, your traditional pastor-centric kind of model of church. So yeah, I think it's opening up all sorts of conversations, which is great.
That's good. Great stuff. Anyone else?
I'll just quickly jump in. Quite a few years ago, I was getting very depressed about the church and the state of the church. And that was talking about the own church that I was in, but also when I was looking around. And so we tried to simplify it in many ways. We said, well, we go back to the original, we go back to the early church. And so we looked at Acts 2:42-47, which is the fellowship of the believers. You'd probably be aware of it. And then we also looked at Ephesians 4:11-16, which is some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. And we only scratched the surface on that one, because it was easy to say the teachers and the pastors in the church, because people were like, yeah, I get that. Maybe even the evangelists to an extent. But from a Baptist background, and some of our churches really struggled with the prophetic and the apostolic in those areas. When we've come into Alan's stuff and looking at it with you and in the training cohorts and those things as well, that what it came back to me was still, it's this interrelatedness. It's he gives those 5 offices, but it's to equip the saints for ministry. It's not to actually run it or delete it. It's actually to equip others. And Acts 2:42-47 sort of says, well, hey, God was really happy with them and blessed them with numbers because they were doing these things. And so it got back to me that it's not so much a head thing. It's actually meant to be very much a heart thing in the way we relate and the way we share with each other as well. And so even the apostle, evangelist, pastor, I've spent time in some Pentecostal churches as well. And the apostle was, lifted up because it was the apostolic church movement that we were part of in those areas. And so I saw that and I thought, because Baptists kind of freaked out about the apostleship because they said, oh, are you saying they say the same thing as scripture? And then they were saying this type of stuff. And what it really, I guess, even going through what we've recently been going through, it's just that reminder that it's not about theory, it's actually about ministry. And it's about, I think liminality in terms of society, that's actually where the church can be the threshold to bring in those areas. But we have to do it God's way. And so we have to give up some of our thoughts or experiences or expressions to try and humble ourselves before God. And in Australia, we know, tall poppy syndrome will knock you down. So if someone comes in one of those roles and the church says, yeah, this is good, some people are going to knock them down. And that's not biblical, that's cultural. So we need to look at how we move towards what those things are talking about, and it's transformation. And I think particularly the 5Q stuff for me, like I said, is this beautiful working together of the five, so it's not 5 separate things. It's actually part of what the church should be looking at and doing in those areas. And then the other side, which I'm coming more and more to believe passionately, is an example is the church, is that we don't just let it be done by the professionals. We actually equip the saints for ministry, and then we chuck them out in the water and we say, okay, if you start sinking, I'll throw a life preserver to you, but you're getting in the water. And I think that's what I hear with our churches talking about. So we want to be disciples. We want to be discipled. And it's like, well, that's kind of simple. Love God, love your neighbor. I mean, that's what it says. So it's those things which help us. And I think for me, the struggle at times has been, even now in my own context, in the church I'm at, it's I'm the solo in that sense. And it's like, and I don't work well in that way. It's more like, no, I need team around me. And a lot of our team are really good, godly people, but they're going, wow, we just, this time we're trying to figure it out. And when we say those type of things, it's just different because people haven't heard it before.
No, that's good, Rob. That's good. Yeah, definitely. It's something that can bring about transformation in us, and I think hearing that, through our message, through our ministry, as we go on mission, and is so important. And great to hear from a positive evangelist in Kathryn, to be able to hear the word lament and hold those two together is so deeply helpful. And it is definitely good news, even in the midst of some tumultuous stuff. I guess the thing with liminality is we just don't, it's just messy. We don't sometimes see the way forward, even though we know Jesus is there. But sometimes even as Christians, we struggle there, and that's okay. So I want to come back to that side of things shortly around discipleship. But again, just encourage our participants on the call. If you have a question there, just pop it in the chat there, and we'll bring that into our conversation while we still have a little bit of time left. So it's been great just hearing you share a bit about how this is a personal thing. Kathryn, you shared a beautiful reflection there that you wrote from a couple of months ago. And I like what you've said, Esther, about that sense of being in that safe place with God. And Rob, you've raised that thing of joy, and Kathryn described that as contentment, which I just think that really resonates to me, in me myself. And I just think this is wonderful. You've got a depth of, through your experience in life with God, the three of you, and how do we bring other people on this journey? So that's the whole discipleship piece. Preaching's one aspect of what we do. Is it one-on-one? Can we do this in small groups? Can we do this as a community on mission? Maybe just give me some of your thoughts or reflections on this. How do we bring others on that journey?
I think
Oh, I think we might have lost you there, Esther. We might just
It's
go
going to
back.
be really good, Oresti.
Yeah, we have to
For
wait.
me, it's be yourself.
Yeah, be yourself.
I found it really interesting recently to realise that the word for truth in various sections of the New Testament is reality, and that I have to be real for my truth to be available for others, but to not be available to others because I need to be able to say what I need to say or be what I need to be, but so that in being with them, I can share that there is a way forward, there is a safe place, that there is joy, that there is a way through, and to be able to help people. And I suppose just bringing in the 5Q, then I'm finding that I'm beginning to hear even how I am each of the fivefold, how I then can encourage them to even look at their circumstances from each of the fivefold, so that we don't get stuck on one perspective, but that we begin to broaden our perspectives in such a way that even at times we can ask people to be from who they are into their area, so that you're actually opening them up in ways that is where they're at rather than necessarily where I'm coming from. So that's fairly important for me.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, being real, so important, isn't it? But sometimes can be so difficult for us in church life to be that vulnerable, real self, and the amazing things that it can unlock, by God's grace through us. Yeah, that's great. Open for comment here. Anyone else? You go, Rob. Go, Rob.
Yeah, just really briefly. So I arrived in Australia in 1985, and I met this guy at a local church. I'd just become a Christian, and I wanted to go to a church when I arrived in Australia. I went in, and I met my wife, Sue, but I met these great people there as well. One of them was just a guy that I clicked with. And so over that time period from then till last month, basically, we were close. We were from different theological backgrounds, and we spent many, many hours sitting under the stars debating theology and those type of things. But we really both loved Jesus, and we wanted to inspire each other for what we were doing. And this friend of mine, unfortunately, last year was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he passed away in September. And obviously with COVID, getting to funerals and those type of things were a bit hard. And so anyway, it was heartbreaking because we loved him. I loved him dearly. And anyway, the actual service, he was able to spend probably close to 25 years in the same area doing ministry in the same, stretch of place in Sydney. And just Sue and I it was just amazing to hear person after person after person come up and share how he and his wife had ministered to them. And I mean, there was probably 30% at least that were actually like, we weren't Christians. We were just going to get married in a local church because it was sandstone and it was pretty. And this friend of ours, he just couldn't help himself. He was an evangelist, loved to share Jesus in those areas. But I was sitting there and I was just blown away for him that this testimony of loving people and being there. And I sat there and I thought, it made me question my own stuff. And I think for discipleship, you don't have to get along with everyone, and you're going to have problems, and there's going to be issues in your church and all those type of things. We know that. But first and foremost, every time he met someone, he would say, "So what is Jesus saying to you now?" And so, I just looked at my own life and I went, "What's the testimony going to be of my life?" And I don't have the answers altogether, but it made me wonder, if we're to make disciples, how do we do that? Do we tell them? Do we show them? Do we love them? Do we do all the combination of the above and stuff? And so it was, like I said, incredibly sad that he passed away at a relatively young age, particularly for his family, who we're very close to as well. But it's just a reminder, you know. I think you make time and you love people. I mean, Jesus did that. I mean, 3 years of ministry, he spent it with, you know, the 12, the 3, the 12, the 70, the 120, in those areas. So, and just in these areas right now, particularly with where we're going with this COVID stuff, we don't have to have the answers, but I think we hold people's hands, hopefully. You know, and I don't know if I do that. I don't know if I do that as a pastor. I want to say this is what you need to do. But, you know, am I that leader that's holding their hands and walking through this stuff? So, yeah. So anyway, so I think disciple, how do you do it in these times? Any way you can, you know, any way you can. And I would say, you know, with my mate, you bring Jesus into it. You know, so it's very simple, but it's kind of not simple at the same time. So,
yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying, and you may have seen the question that Jordan and Talisha put up that question. You've sort of responded. You've certainly given a response there, Rob. The question is, from Jordan and Talisha, how do you equip or disciple someone during this decentralized liminal space that we're in, COVID-19? I certainly heard what you've said there. You know, time, you know, giving time, love, holding their hand. I guess not in a patronizing way, but a supportive way. Any way you can, definitely. And Jesus at the center, so important. But yeah, time. I've once heard it said that, you know, how do you spell love? It's Time. You know, giving time to people. It can be such a pull in the opposite direction that our society really shapes us in. And I guess COVID has really caused us to stop, hasn't it? Because so many things aren't happening now. And we can't busy ourselves with the things that we did before. And maybe we're coming to the end of ourselves, just not being comfortable in this situation. But so what are some other thoughts maybe around how we do disciple or equip people during this time? We can't meet face to face in Victoria. In Melbourne, we can't. We've used a lot of Zoom and we're all loving it, aren't we? We just can't wait to get more of Zoom. I think we're a bit over it, but yeah, it's decentralized. You know, if we are able to meet at some point, it's probably not going to be 200 or 300 people. It might only be 50. Just maybe this might be just a good one for us to close on. Just some thoughts maybe from each of you. Some, you know, bearing in mind what Rob's just shared, some other pointers or tips or some little pearls of wisdom.
I love what Rob said, any way we can. And I think that's true, because there's no limit to God's creativity when we tap into that. But just a couple of thoughts that come to my mind, just practical ways of engaging and particularly just in the neighbourhood and that, like what Rob was talking about, that long-term commitment to a place and a people. It's just so powerful. So I think of one of a good friend of mine in my suburb who, whenever she goes out for a coffee at our local cafe, which is about 5 minutes down the road, she's got a little WhatsApp group with her street, and any one of them will just put in the chat coffee ? and the street will put their coffee orders in, and whoever's going will go grab the coffees, and it's just this joint expression of neighbourhood, but also supporting local business. And that's just, to me, I think part of discipleship is letting people know that you're for them and not against them, and that's God's heart for people. And even just asking people to dream, like we might call it kingdom imagination or thinking about what God's doing to flourish the neighbourhood. But other people will just be thinking, well, this is the good stuff that God, like they won't reference God in it, but what's your dream for your family, your neighbourhood, and joining in, because God's part of that. Another example that comes to mind, just for me personally and my next door neighbour, we as a church, I just wanted to encourage, we've got small groups, encourage them to just dream, if we gave them some seed money, what would they do with that to love their community? And you know, we had some groups come up with some really creative ideas, and one of them said they were going to put together care packs for international students for a local uni, and they wanted to put in their coffee vouchers to support a local business as well. And you know, while I was looking through all the proposals, this one really stood out to me, and I looked at the name of the cafe, and it was my next door neighbour's cafe. And so now there's a conversation that we can have going, you know, hey, how's the cafe going, Jerry? And and he knows Rhiannon, who's from church, and there's all this sort of cross-referencing happening, and they know without a doubt that we're a church that is for their family, for their local business, and there's something powerful, a powerful statement about God in that. So it might not be behavioural modification sort of discipleship, but it's joining in with God's kingdom imagination, I think.
Yeah, that's great, Kathryn. Great points there. Love it. Love it.
Yeah, I suppose for me, and I'm just going back to where we've just come back from Yower. So and we've been out there for 3 months this last stint. And the words that the Lord impressed on me were the as you go from, you know, go you into all the world, that it's an as you go. So there was this, God challenged me to not be so spiritual in the things I do, because I'm prophetic and I love to be in the word and I love to be this, that, and the other thing, but to actually get out there and do things with different people, and to be comfortable with the people that, you know, the one in front of me, and that. And so there was an old lady in town, actually she'll be 90 in January, and had an accident last year, fell over and broke her hip, and was just getting started in walking again. And so I said, would you like me to go walking with you so you can actually do that? Because that then meant, you know, she had someone with her if anything happened. It meant that her husband, who had just turned 90, and her son also knew that there was someone with her, and it started, but it gave time for her to talk as a woman, and to just share how she's gone through life, and to bring in things with God as they came up, but then to later on to pick up 2 or 3 other people who were isolated from the ones who genuinely got together, and bring them in and just have a morning tea once a week, in each of their homes, so that there was something that they were remembered and not left out and lost because of they were isolated in their own little situation. And so the as you go became really important for me. But at the same time, you know, today I've got my next thing. I am called back into the garden alone. You know, it depends on where you are, what you're doing, and who you are. And I mean, that was stretching me, because I don't like being an introvert and being someone who likes to be alone. To actually go out and to be and to do, I was developing those other parts of me that actually, you know, it doesn't cost me.
Yeah.
Apart from just giving people time, and then the opportunities that come up in these conversations to support and encourage them, because some of them weren't church folk, and to just be there, and you speak into the space that they need, and it creates a little bit of life in the middle of a liminal situation, that
great.
everybody is affected by. So yeah.
That's great. I like what you share there, Esther, and I love your honesty too, because you've named yourself as an introvert. Love being in that space alone with God, which is so important for someone who's a prophet or comes from that prophetic leaning. But your honesty and a willingness to push out, and you reference things that are, you sort of said not spiritual, but more sort of normal everyday kind of things, human things, but those things are spiritual, and I think that's a great recipe, along with everything Kathryn and Rob shared around how we can disciple people in the everyday, particularly in this situation where it's very decentralized and may continue to be so. If we're able to go back and meet the way we could in larger numbers, may continue to be decentralized. Because just as I'm wrapping up here, I'm just mindful when I saw a wonderful piece of artistic graffiti on a wall in the city that says, it flipped it away, the whole idea of us being human beings seeking to be spiritual. It was, we are spiritual beings seeking to be human. But our humanity in that sense, when we live into it the way God created us to, is a very spiritual thing, which then brings me back to this thing, we shouldn't be living dualistic lives where some things are the holy things of God and others are not. That the WhatsApp group with the coffee request, anyone want coffee? That is a spiritual act of blessing your neighbours, a spiritual act indeed, listening to people, having those conversations. Wonderful opportunities to be able to disciple people that they might become more like Jesus. And even when we're engaging with people that might not profess a faith in him, we can still be engaging people and loving them and caring, and because I'll be going through their liminal spaces as well. Great stuff. Hey, thanks everyone for joining in on the call. Thanks Rob, Kathryn and Esther for joining us on the lounge. Really appreciate what you've had to say, and for all the participants for joining us on this call. And Emily's also appreciated it. She's put a comment up there. Thanks so much for sharing, guys. Really encouraging and thought-provoking. And thank you to all again. So we're actually, this is going to be our last Liminality Lounge session where we're discussing liminality. Believe it or not, we're going to have a break for a while. It's been great to have these sessions. We've had 5 Sundays going on this journey of conversations, but we will at some point in the future be coming back to the Liminality Lounge, and we might be raising some other conversations in the broader mix of, being on mission with God in the neighbourhood, out in the community, outside the 4 walls of the church as well as within, because invariably when we do that and we lean into what God's calling us to, we will experience liminality. And as we lean into God, we can find that it's a good thing for us, and he is there in the midst of it all. All right, take care, bless you all, and have a good week ahead. Bye-bye.